She's being beaten. The words hung in the air of the crowded restaurant like a gunshot, and every conversation at the surrounding tables seemed to fade into silence, at least for Victor Kessler. His hand stopped mid-reach for his glass of scotch. Across the white-clothed table, his longtime associate and legal counsel, Marcus Webb, continued speaking as if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of their business dinner. "I shouldn't be telling you this," Marcus said, his voice low, urgent. He was a therapist's husband. That's how he knew. His wife, Dr. Caroline Webb, had come home 3 nights ago, shaking, unable to sleep. She'd broken down and told him everything. Caroline could lose her license. She could go to prison. But she couldn't live with herself if something happened to that woman. Victor's jaw tightened. "Who?" It wasn't a question. It was a command. Marcus hesitated. "Victor, I need you to understand. Who?" The single syllable came out like the crack of ice breaking. Margot Sinclair. The name landed in Victor's chest like a blade. Margot. His Margot. No, not his. Never his. She was the woman he'd been watching from a distance for nearly 2 years. The woman who ran the small, struggling art restoration studio 3 blocks from his downtown office. The woman with the soft copper hair that caught the light like autumn leaves, and the quiet, careful way she moved through the world, as if she was trying not to take up too much space. He'd never spoken more than a handful of words to her. A nod in passing, a brief exchange about the weather when they'd ended up in the same coffee shop. She had no idea who he really was. To her, he was just another businessman in an expensive suit. But to him, she was everything he couldn't have. And now, someone was hurting her. Victor stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped back with a harsh sound against the marble floor. Heads turned. His security detail, stationed at the restaurant's entrance, immediately went on alert. "Victor, wait!" Marcus reached for his arm. "Who is he?" Victor's voice was quiet now. Dangerously quiet. The kind of quiet that made men who knew him well take a step back. Her husband, Graham Sinclair. They've been married about 8 months. I know who Graham Sinclair is. And he did. A mid-level investment banker with a forgettable face and a reputation for being charming at parties. Victor had seen him once, at some charity gala, with his hand possessively on Margot's lower back, while she smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He'd hated him on sight. Now he was going to destroy him. Victor. Marcus stood as well, lowering his voice even further. "You can't just... This isn't how things are done. There are legal channels. Caroline's already risking everything by... Your wife did the right thing." Victor's eyes were ice. "Now I'm going to do what needs to be done." He turned and walked toward the exit, his stride long and purposeful. His head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Dimitri, fell into step beside him immediately. "Sir?" "Find out everything about Graham Sinclair. Finances, properties, habits. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and what he dreams about at night. Timeline." Victor pushed through the restaurant's glass doors into the cold night air. 1 hour. Margot Sinclair stood in her bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The bruise on her ribs was a deep, ugly purple now. It had been red at first, angry and hot to the touch, when Graham had shoved her into the kitchen counter 2 nights ago. She'd made the mistake of asking him why he'd come home at 3 in the morning. She'd made the mistake of sounding like she cared. She lifted her shirt higher, wincing at the movement, and examined the damage with a detached, clinical eye. She'd gotten good at that, at separating herself from her body, from her pain, at looking at the evidence of her husband's rage as if it belonged to someone else. Someone who deserved help. Someone who would actually get it. But that wasn't her. She'd learned that the hard way. The one time she'd tried to confide in someone, Dr. Webb, her therapist, just last week. She'd seen the horror in the woman's eyes and immediately regretted it. She'd backtracked, said she'd exaggerated, said it wasn't that bad. Dr. Webb hadn't believed her. Margot could tell. And now she lived in terror that somehow, some way, Graham would find out she'd said anything at all. The front door of the apartment slammed, and Margot's entire body went rigid. She yanked her shirt down, smoothed her hair, and forced her face into an expression of calm neutrality. The expression she'd practiced so many times it felt like a mask sewn into her skin. "Margot," Graham's voice echoed through the apartment. He didn't sound angry. He sounded cheerful. That was almost worse. "In here," she called out, keeping her voice light. She stepped out of the bathroom and found him in the living room, loosening his tie, a satisfied smile on his face. "Good news," he said, crossing to her and pressing a kiss to her forehead. She forced herself not to flinch. "The Harrington account came through. We're celebrating this weekend. Dinner at Aurelius. I already made the reservation." Aurelius. The most exclusive restaurant in the city. A 6-month waiting list for most people. But Graham knew people. Graham always knew people. "That's wonderful," Margot said. The words tasted like ash. "Wear something nice." His eyes flicked down her body, assessing. "Not that blue dress. It makes you look washed out." "Okay. And do something with your hair." "You've been looking tired lately. I don't want people thinking I married a woman who can't take care of herself." "Okay." His smile widened, and he patted her cheek. The gesture might have looked affectionate to anyone watching, but his fingers pressed just a little too hard. A reminder. "That's my girl." He disappeared into the bedroom, and Margot stood frozen in the living room, her hands trembling at her sides. She thought about the fire escape outside their bedroom window. She thought about the small amount of cash she'd managed to hide in a tampon box under the sink, the one place Graham would never look. She thought about the domestic violence hotline number she'd memorized but never called. She thought about escape. But then she thought about what Graham had told her, so calmly, so matter-of-factly. The last time she'd tried to leave. "If you ever try to run from me, Margot, I will find you. And I won't just hurt you. I'll hurt everyone you've ever cared about. Your sister, your friends, that little old lady you buy flowers from at the farmer's market. I'll burn your whole world down, and then I'll drag you back home." He'd said it with a smile. She'd believed every word. So she stayed. And she survived. And she prayed that somehow, some way, something would change. She just never imagined it would come in the form of a man like Victor Kessler. The file on Graham Sinclair landed on Victor's desk at 11:47 p.m. Dimitri stood at attention while Victor flipped through the pages. Bank records, property holdings, phone logs, a detailed timeline of his movements over the past 3 months, and photographs. Victor's hand stilled on a particular image. Margot, 3 weeks ago, at a charity luncheon. She was wearing a long-sleeved dress, in September when the weather was still warm. She was smiling for the camera, but her posture was stiff, guarded, and just visible at the edge of her sleeve, where the fabric had ridden up slightly, was the faint edge of a bruise. Victor stared at that photograph for a long time. He thought about the way she'd looked the first time he'd seen her, standing outside her studio, wrestling with an oversized canvas that was too big for her to carry alone. He'd almost stopped to help her, almost introduced himself. But something had held him back. A voice in his head reminding him of who he was. What he was. Victor Kessler was not a good man. He ran an empire built on shadows, on fear, on debts that could never be repaid. He'd done things that would make Margot Sinclair recoil in horror. He'd ordered things that would keep her up at night. He'd told himself all this time that staying away from her was the right thing to do, the noble thing, that she deserved better than a monster like him. But now there was a different kind of monster in her life. And this one was going to learn what happened when you touched something Victor Kessler had decided to protect. "How long until we have everything?" Victor asked. "By morning," Dimitri replied. "Financials are almost done. We'll have leverage within 24 hours. "Good. And his schedule tomorrow?" "He has a meeting downtown at 10. Lunch with clients at noon. He'll be out of the apartment from 9:30 until at least 2. Victor nodded slowly. "Then that's when I'll go see her." Dimitri didn't flinch, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "Sir," if I may. This woman, she doesn't know who you are. She doesn't know anything about our world. If you show up at her door, you may frighten her more than her husband ever has." Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know. So what's your plan?" Victor looked down at the photograph again, at the ghost of a bruise on Margot Sinclair's wrist. "I'm going to tell her the truth." The knock came at 10:15 a.m. Margot had been in the middle of cleaning, something she did obsessively when Graham wasn't home, as if she could scrub away the tension that lived in the walls of their apartment. She froze at the sound, her heart immediately hammering. Graham wasn't due back for hours. "It's probably just a delivery," she told herself, "or a neighbor." She set down her cloth and walked to the door, checking the peephole. And then she stopped breathing. The man on the other side of the door was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dark wool coat like it had been made for him. His hair was almost black, shot through with silver at the temples, and his features were sharp, angular, striking in a way that was almost severe. But it was his eyes that made Margot's throat tighten, pale blue, clear as winter sky, and fixed directly on the peephole, as if he knew she was watching. She recognized him. She didn't know his name, but she'd seen him before. At the coffee shop down the street. On the sidewalk outside her studio. He'd nodded at her once, and she'd felt the strangest sensation, like being seen for the first time in years. Now he was standing at her door, and every instinct in her body was screaming 2 things at once: run and stay. "Mrs. Sinclair." His voice was low, measured, and it carried through the door like he was standing right beside her. "My name is Victor Kessler. I'm not here to hurt you, but I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Margot's hand hovered over the lock. "I know what your husband has been doing to you," Victor said, "and I'm here to make it stop." Her fingers went numb. She should call the police. She should tell him to go away. She opened the door. Victor Kessler didn't step inside. He stood on the threshold, his hands visible at his sides, his posture deliberately non-threatening. Up close, he was even more imposing. There was a coiled stillness to him, like a predator choosing not to strike. But his eyes, when they met hers, were not predatory. They were furious. And beneath that fury, something that looked almost like pain. "How do you know?" Margot whispered. "Your therapist told her husband. Her husband told me." Margot's stomach dropped. "Dr. Webb? She wasn't supposed to." "She broke the law to save your life." Victor's voice was blunt. "Are you going to let her risk mean something?" Margot opened her mouth, closed it. Tears burned at the backs of her eyes, and she blinked them away furiously. She didn't cry. She couldn't cry. Crying meant weakness, and weakness meant Graham would... "He's not here," Victor said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "And he won't be back for hours. You're safe right now. I need you to hear that. You're safe." A sound escaped her throat, something between a laugh and a sob. "I haven't been safe in 8 months. Victor's jaw tightened. "I know, that ends today." She let him in. Later, she would wonder what had possessed her. What madness had made her open her door to a stranger? A man whose name she didn't know, whose intentions she couldn't verify, whose entire presence radiated a kind of controlled danger that should have sent her running. But the truth was, Margot was tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of pretending. Tired of smiling through the pain and telling herself that tomorrow would be different. And there was something in Victor Kessler's eyes, something steady and certain and absolutely immovable, that made her believe, for the first time in months, that maybe someone could actually help. They sat in her living room, she on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He in the armchair across from her, leaning forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. He didn't rush her. He didn't push. He just waited. And so she told him. She told him about the first time Graham had grabbed her arm hard enough to leave fingerprint bruises. 3 weeks after the wedding. She'd burned dinner, and he'd lost his temper. He'd apologized afterward. Brought her flowers. Sworn it would never happen again. It happened again. She told him about the isolation. How Graham had slowly, methodically cut her off from her friends, her family. How he monitored her phone. Controlled the bank accounts. Made her account for every minute she wasn't with him. She told him about the fear, the constant low-grade terror that lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. The way she walked on eggshells every moment of every day, trying to anticipate his moods, trying to be perfect, trying to be invisible. She told him about the night he'd shoved her into the counter, the bruise that was still healing on her ribs. And through it all, Victor listened. His expression didn't change. His posture didn't shift. But something in the room grew heavier, darker, more charged, like a storm building on the horizon. When she finished, her voice hoarse, her cheeks wet with tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Can I see it?" Margot blinked. "What?" "The bruise." She should have said no. She should have been horrified. But there was something in the way he asked, clinical almost, like a doctor assessing damage. Slowly she stood, turned to the side, lifted the hem of her sweater. Victor rose from the chair and crossed to her. He moved carefully, telegraphing his every step, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He stopped a foot away and looked at the bruise. It was still dark, still angry, still evidence of exactly what kind of man Graham Sinclair was. Victor's hand lifted, and then stopped. "May I?" Margot's breath caught. She nodded. His fingers brushed the edge of the bruise. Barely a touch. Light as air. And something in his eyes went terrifyingly cold. "I'm going to tell you something now," he said, his voice low. "And I need you to listen carefully." Margot let her sweater fall back into place. Her skin was tingling where he'd touched her. "I am not a good man, Margot. I've done things that would horrify you. I run an empire that operates outside the law, and I've built it on fear and power and the willingness to do what other men won't. I'm telling you this because you deserve the truth, and because I need you to understand what it means when I say what I'm about to say." He held her gaze. "Your husband will never touch you again. I'm going to make certain of that, and I'm going to do it my way, which means it will be permanent. If that frightens you, if you want me to walk out that door and never come back, I'll do it. But I need you to decide now." Margot stared at him. Her heart was pounding. Her mind was racing. This man was dangerous. That was obvious. He was telling her explicitly that he was a criminal, that he solved problems in ways that didn't involve police reports or court dates. She should be terrified. But all she could think about was the gentle way he'd asked before touching her, the way he'd given her a choice. When was the last time anyone had given her a choice? "I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me," she said quietly. "That's not what I asked." She took a shaky breath. "What are you going to do to him?" "I'm going to take everything he has. His money, his career, his reputation. By the time I'm done, Graham Sinclair won't be able to get a job as a dishwasher in this city. And then I'm going to make sure he understands that if he ever comes near you again, if he ever even thinks about you again, the consequences will be so severe that he'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder." Margot was quiet. Then she said, "And if that doesn't stop him?" Victor's expression didn't flicker. "It will." The certainty in his voice was absolute, and God help her, she believed him. "Okay," she whispered. Victor nodded once. "Then pack a bag. You're not staying here another night." "Where will I go?" "I have a property outside the city. Secure. Private. You'll be safe there until this is over. I can't just disappear. I have my studio, my work. Your studio will be fine. I'll have someone watch it. Graham will notice I'm gone." Graham will be too busy watching his entire life collapse to worry about where you've gone. Victor's voice hardened. And by the time he thinks to look for you, he won't have the resources to find you. Margot's hands were trembling. This was insane. This was absolutely insane. She was about to leave her home with a man she'd just met, a man who'd admitted to being a criminal, and trust him to protect her from her abusive husband. But the alternative was staying and waiting for the next time Graham lost his temper. Staying and wondering if the next bruise would be the one that sent her to the hospital, or worse. Margot thought about the fire escape, the hidden cash, the hotline number she'd never called. And she realized that she'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for something to change, waiting for someone to see her. Maybe this was it. Maybe this man, this dangerous, ice-eyed stranger, was her way out. "Okay," she said again, stronger this time. Victor's expression shifted, just slightly, just for a moment. He almost looked relieved. "Then let's go." The drive took 45 minutes. Victor sat in the front seat with Dimitri, speaking in low tones about things Margot couldn't quite hear. She sat in the back, her single bag on the seat beside her, watching the city give way to trees and rolling hills and wide-open sky. She should be panicking. She should be second-guessing every decision that had led her to this moment. But instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Calm, like she could finally breathe. The property, when they arrived, was not what she expected. She'd imagined something cold, imposing, a fortress designed to intimidate. Instead, she found herself staring at a sprawling farmhouse with white clapboard siding and a wide front porch. Ivy climbed the walls. Gardens bloomed on either side of the gravel drive. The place looked like something out of a magazine, warm and welcoming, and utterly at odds with the man who owned it. "This is yours?" she asked as Dimitri pulled the car to a stop. Victor glanced back at her. "It belonged to my mother. I keep it maintained." There was something in his voice, something almost soft. Margot didn't ask more. Inside, the house was just as unexpected. Hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, books everywhere, stacked on shelves, piled on tables, even tucked into the windowsills. It smelled like wood smoke and lavender, and there were fresh flowers in a vase on the kitchen counter. "There's a guest room upstairs," Victor said, leading her through the foyer. "Clean linens, private bath. You'll have everything you need. How long will I be here?" "A few days, maybe a week. Long enough for me to dismantle your husband's life." The casual way he said it should have been chilling. Instead, Margot felt a fierce, savage satisfaction that shocked her. "What happens after that?" Victor stopped at the foot of the stairs, turned to face her. "That depends on you. I can set you up somewhere new. Different city, different name if you want it. Enough money to start over. Or," he paused, "you can stay." "Stay where?" "Here." Margot blinked. "You mean live here? At your house?" "It's safe. It's private. And you'd have time to figure out what you want to do next without worrying about money or logistics." "And what would you want in return?" Victor's jaw tightened. "Nothing." "Nothing? I'm not your husband, Margot. I don't expect payment for basic human decency." The words hit her like a punch. Because that's exactly what Graham had done. Every kind gesture came with a price. Every favor was a debt to be collected later. She'd forgotten what it felt like for someone to give without taking. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You don't know me. We've barely spoken. Why would you—" "Because I've watched you," Victor said quietly. "For almost 2 years. I've seen you coming and going from your studio. I've seen the way you stop to talk to the homeless man on the corner, the one everyone else ignores. I've seen you stay late to help your clients, even when you're exhausted. I've seen you buy extra pastries from the bakery and hand them out to the kids at the bus stop." He paused. "I've seen you, Margot, and I've seen the way that light in you has been dimming, month by month. I didn't know why until last night." But I knew something was wrong, and I should have done something sooner. Margot's throat was tight. You didn't owe me anything. No, but that doesn't mean I didn't want to help. His eyes held hers. I'm not a good man. I've told you that. But even I know the difference between right and wrong. And what's happening to you is wrong. So I'm going to stop it. That's all. That's all. As if saving her life was nothing. As if upending his entire world for a woman he barely knew was simple. As if she mattered. Margot felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Thank you, she said. It wasn't enough. The words were pathetically inadequate for everything he was doing. But Victor nodded as if he understood. Get some rest. Tomorrow, I'll tell you everything I know about your husband's situation, and then you can decide how involved you want to be. Involved? In his destruction. A ghost of a smile crossed Victor's face. I thought you might want a front row seat. And despite everything, despite the terror and the exhaustion and the impossibility of the past 24 hours, Margot felt her lips curve. Yeah, she said. I think I might. The next 3 days were a revelation. Margot slept more than she had in months. Deep, dreamless sleep in a soft bed with clean sheets and no fear of what might happen if she moved wrong or breathed too loudly. She ate meals that the housekeeper, a kind-eyed woman named Helen, prepared without being asked. Real food. Warm food. Food that someone had made just for her. She walked the property, acres of meadows and woods, and a small pond where ducks floated serenely in the afternoon sun. She sat on the porch and read books from Victor's library. She breathed, and every evening Victor came. He didn't stay at the farmhouse. He had business in the city, he said, and it was easier for him to work from his office there. But he drove out every night, arriving around 7, and they would sit in the living room while he updated her on the situation. Graham Sinclair's life was falling apart. It happened slowly at first, a client who suddenly pulled their account. A deal that fell through at the last minute. Whispers around the office about irregularities in his financials. Then it happened faster. An anonymous tip to his firm's compliance department about potential fraud. A sudden audit from the IRS. His credit cards declined. His mortgage called in. His car repossessed. Victor laid it all out for her, piece by piece, like a general describing a military campaign. And Margot listened, rapt, as the man who had terrorized her for 8 months was systematically dismantled. How are you doing this? She asked on the 3rd night. How do you have this kind of power? Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I told you I wasn't a good man. That's not an answer. No, but it's the truth. He met her eyes. I've spent 20 years building an organization that operates in the spaces between laws. I control shipping routes, financial networks, political connections. I have influence in places that most people don't even know exist, and I use that influence to achieve my goals, whatever those goals might be. And right now, your goal is destroying my husband. Yes? Why? Really? You said you'd see me around, but that can't be enough. Nobody does all this for someone they've barely spoken to. Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he said, My mother was married to a man like your husband. Margot went still. I was 8 years old when it started. I'd hear them at night, the shouting, the sounds of things breaking, the sounds of her crying. I didn't understand what was happening at first, but I learned. His voice was flat, controlled, but his hands, resting on his knees, had curled into fists. She stayed with him for 12 years. She stayed because she thought she had no choice. Because he'd convinced her that she was worthless, that no one else would ever want her, that she deserved what he did to her. She stayed until one night. He went too far. Margot's chest ached. Victor. She survived. Barely. And when she got out of the hospital, I took her away. I was 20 years old and I had nothing. No money, no connections, no power. But I swore to myself that I would build something. Something so strong that no one would ever be able to hurt her again. That no one would ever be able to hurt anyone I cared about again. He looked at her. That's why I do what I do. That's why I have the power I have. And that's why, when I found out what was happening to you, I couldn't walk away. Margot's eyes were burning. I'm so sorry, she whispered. About your mother. About what you went through. Don't be sorry. Be angry. His voice hardened. Be angry that men like Graham Sinclair exist. Be angry that the system protects them. Be angry that women like you and my mother have to fight for their lives while the world looks the other way. I am angry. Good. Hold on to that. You're going to need it. For what? Victor leaned forward slightly. Because tomorrow, Graham is going to find out exactly who's been destroying him. And he's going to come looking for answers. Margot's heart lurched. You're going to confront him? No. I'm going to give him the opportunity to confront me. And when he does, I'm going to make sure he understands exactly what happens if he ever thinks about coming near you again. There was something terrifying in his voice, and something deeply, devastatingly reassuring. What if he doesn't back down? Margot asked. Victor's smile was cold. Then I'll give him a more persuasive demonstration. The confrontation happened the following afternoon. Margot wasn't there. Victor had insisted she stay at the farmhouse, and she hadn't argued. But he called her that evening, and his voice was different than she'd ever heard it. Satisfied. It's done. Margot gripped the phone. What happened? He came to my office, demanded to know why I was targeting him. I told him. You told him about me? I told him that I knew what he'd been doing to his wife, and I told him what would happen if he ever tried to contact you again. What did he say? He tried to deny it at first. Then he threatened me. A cold laugh. He threatened me, as if he had any idea who he was talking to. And then? Then Dmitri showed him out, and I made a few phone calls. By tomorrow morning, every firm in the city will know what kind of man Graham Sinclair is. He won't work in finance again. He won't work anywhere again. And if he's smart, if he has any survival instinct at all, he'll leave the state and never come back. Margot sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. It's really over? It's really over. She closed her eyes. 8 months of terror. 8 months of walking on eggshells and holding her breath and wondering if tonight would be the night he finally went too far. And now, in the span of a week, a man she barely knew had ended it all. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice cracking. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. Victor, you saved my life. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't... She broke off, unable to finish. You would have survived, Victor said quietly. You're stronger than you know. But I'm glad you didn't have to do it alone. Margot wiped her eyes. What happens now? Now you decide what you want. You can stay at the farmhouse as long as you need. You can go back to your studio. I've had it cleaned and secured. Or you can start over somewhere else entirely. It's your choice. Your choice. 2 words she'd almost forgotten the meaning of. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. She took a breath. Will I see you again? There was a pause. Then Victor said, Do you want to? And Margot realized, with a clarity that surprised her, that she did. She wanted to see him again. She wanted to know more about this man who'd swept into her life like a storm and dismantled her nightmare with methodical precision. This man who'd been gentle with her pain and ruthless with her abuser. This man who'd told her the truth about who he was. All of it. The darkness and the danger, and then let her make her own decision. Yes, she said. I want to see you again. Another pause. Then I'll come by tomorrow. He hung up before she could respond. And Margot sat in the quiet of the farmhouse, her heart racing, wondering what she'd just set in motion. He came the next morning, earlier than she expected. She was in the kitchen, making coffee, when she heard the crunch of gravel outside. By the time she reached the front door, he was already on the porch, and something in his expression made her breath catch. He looked uncertain. It was the first time she'd seen him look anything less than completely in control. "I should have called first," he said. "It's fine. I was just... Come in." She stepped back to let him pass, and he moved into the foyer, then stopped, like he wasn't sure what to do next. "I brought something," he said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Velvet. Old. Margot stared at it. "Victor, it's not..." He stopped. Started again. "It's not what you think. It was my mother's. She asked me to give it to someone who mattered." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Simple. Beautiful. A single sapphire set in white gold. "I'm not asking for anything," Victor said. "I don't expect anything. I know you've just escaped a nightmare, and the last thing you need is another man trying to claim you, but I wanted you to have this. Because you matter. To me. More than I ever intended." Margot looked at the ring. Then she looked at him. "When did you intend to tell me that?" His jaw tightened. "I wasn't going to." "Why not?" "Because I didn't want to put pressure on you. Because you deserve time to heal without some man hovering around, waiting for you to be ready for something more. Because I'm..." He broke off. "Because you're what?" He met her eyes. "Because I'm not the kind of man who gets to have this." The words hung in the air between them, and Margot realized, with a sudden, fierce certainty, that she was done letting other people decide what she deserved. She'd spent 8 months with a man who told her she was worthless. She'd spent years before that with people who told her to be smaller, quieter, less demanding. She was done. "You don't get to decide that," she said. Victor blinked. "You don't get to decide what kind of man gets to have this," Margot continued, stepping closer. "And you don't get to decide what I deserve. I've had enough of men making decisions for me. If you want to be part of my life, then you ask. And then I decide." Victor was very still. "Is that what you want?" he asked quietly. "For me to ask?" "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Margot, will you let me be part of your life?" She took another step. They were close now. Close enough that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the silver in his hair, the way his breath had gone shallow. "Yes," she said, "but I have a condition." "Name it." "Don't ever lie to me. Don't ever hide things from me to protect me. If you're going to be in my life, you're going to be in it, honestly. All of it. The dark parts, too. I need to know what I'm choosing." Victor's expression shifted. "You might not like what you find. Maybe not, but I'd rather know the truth than live in another lie." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was gentle, careful, like she was something precious. "I will never lie to you," he said. "I will never hide from you. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me." "That's a long time." "Yes." "You might get tired of trying." "No." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "I won't." And then he kissed her. It was soft at first, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. She leaned into him, her hands fisting in his coat, and kissed him back with everything she had. All the fear, all the hope. All the fierce, terrified joy of finally being free. When they broke apart, Victor's forehead rested against hers, and she could feel his heart pounding through his chest. "I'm going to take care of you," he murmured, "for as long as you'll let me." "I don't need you to take care of me." "I know, but I want to. Let me." Margot closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself be held. 6 months later. The gallery opening was packed. Margot stood near the back, a glass of champagne in her hand, watching the crowd move through her exhibition. Her exhibition. 32 pieces of restored artwork, each one representing months of painstaking work, and beside them her own original pieces. Paintings she'd made in the quiet of the farmhouse studio Victor had built for her. Paintings of storms and fire and phoenix wings rising from ashes. They were selling. All of them. "You should be up there," Victor said, appearing at her side. He was in a dark suit, perfectly tailored, and he looked at her the way he always did, like she was the only person in the room. "I hate crowds," she said. "I know, but this is your night. You should enjoy it." She leaned into him, and his arm came around her automatically, holding her. Steady. "I am enjoying it," she said. "Right here." He pressed a kiss to her temple. Across the room, she spotted Helen talking animatedly to a man in a tweed jacket, probably trying to sell him on commissioning a piece, because Helen had appointed herself Margot's unofficial marketing director and took the job very seriously. Dmitri was by the door, looking uncomfortable in a tie, but scanning the room with the same watchful intensity he brought to everything. And there were others. Friends Margot had made in the past 6 months, colleagues, neighbors, people who knew her as the woman who ran the art restoration studio and lived in the beautiful farmhouse outside the city with the intimidating man who adored her. They didn't know the rest. They didn't need to. "I have something for you," Victor said. Margot looked up at him. "Tonight?" "Tonight." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Margot's heart stopped. "Victor, I know we haven't talked about this. I know it might be too soon, but I've been carrying this around for 3 months waiting for the right moment, and I realize that there's never going to be a perfect time. There's only now. And I don't want to wait anymore." He opened the box. It wasn't his mother's ring. It was something new. Something different. A diamond, set in a band of white gold, with 2 small sapphires on either side. "The sapphires are from my mother's ring," Victor said. "I had them reset. I wanted you to have something that was old and new, something that honored where we came from and where we're going." Margot's eyes were blurring. "Victor, marry me." His voice was rough. "Be my wife. Let me stand beside you for the rest of our lives. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. Openly, honestly, completely." A tear slid down her cheek. "Yes." The word came out without hesitation, because she didn't need to think about it. She didn't need to weigh the options or consider the risks or wonder if she was making a mistake. She knew. She'd known for months. This man, this dangerous, devoted, impossible man, was her future, and she was done waiting for it to start. "Yes," she said again, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Victor's face broke into a smile, a real smile, rare and radiant and so beautiful it made her chest ache. And he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Around them the crowd had started to notice. Heads were turning. Whispers were spreading. And then someone started to clap. And someone else. And before Margot knew what was happening, the entire gallery was applauding, and she was laughing, and Victor was pulling her into his arms and kissing her in front of everyone. In front of everyone. Not hiding. Not pretending. Just loving her, out loud, where the whole world could see. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you, too." And standing there in the middle of her gallery, surrounded by her art and her friends, and the man who had walked into her life and burned down all her cages, Margot Sinclair finally understood what it meant to be free. Not just free from fear, free to love, free to live, free to become the woman she was always meant to be. And she was just getting started. The champagne was still fizzing in glasses all around the gallery when Margot's phone buzzed in her clutch. She ignored it at first. She was too busy accepting congratulations, too busy watching Victor shake hands with people who had no idea who he really was, too busy touching the ring on her finger every few seconds just to make sure it was real. But the phone buzzed again, and again, and again. Victor noticed before she did. His eyes flicked to her clutch, then to her face. "Everything all right?" I'm sure it's nothing. But she pulled out the phone anyway, glancing at the screen. 14 missed calls, all from the same number, a number she didn't recognize. And then a text came through. I know where you are. I know what he did to me. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of monster you're marrying. Margot's blood turned to ice. What is it? Victor's voice had changed, sharpened. He was already reading her face, already sensing the shift. She handed him the phone without a word. Victor looked at the screen, and something in his expression went very, very still. We're leaving, he said. Now. Victor, the gallery, my show. Dimitri will handle it. We need to go. He took her hand and led her toward the back exit, moving fast but not fast enough to cause a scene. Margot's heart was hammering. Her mind was racing. Graham. It had to be Graham. But it had been 6 months. 6 months of silence. She'd started to believe, to hope, that he'd actually listened. That he'd taken Victor's warning and disappeared. She should have known better. Men like Graham didn't disappear. They waited. They planned. And then they struck. The car was waiting in the alley behind the gallery. Dimitri was already behind the wheel, and they were moving before Margot had even finished buckling her seatbelt. Where did he get this number? She asked. Her voice was shaking. She hated that. Hated that after everything, Graham could still make her shake. I changed my phone. I changed everything. He's been planning this. Victor's jaw was tight. He's been watching, waiting for the right moment to cause maximum damage. The engagement. He saw it somehow. It doesn't matter how he found out. What matters is what he's planning to do next. Margot's stomach dropped. The text said he was going to make sure everyone knows. Knows what? Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Me. What do you mean? He's going to expose me. What I am. What I do. He's going to try to destroy your reputation by association. Make you look like a fool for leaving an abusive husband only to get engaged to a criminal. The word hit her like a slap. Criminal. She knew what Victor was. She'd known from the beginning. He'd never hidden it from her, never pretended to be anything other than what he was. But hearing it said out loud, hearing it framed as something that could be used against her, made her realize how fragile everything was, how easily it could all come crashing down. He can't prove anything, she said. Can he? You're careful. You've always been careful. I have been. But Graham Sinclair has spent 6 months with nothing to do but dig. And a man with nothing to lose is a dangerous thing. Margot closed her eyes. 6 months. 6 months of healing, of rebuilding, of learning to trust again, to hope again, to believe that she could have a life that wasn't defined by fear. And now this. What do we do? She whispered. Victor reached over and took her hand. We find him. And we end this, permanently. They didn't go to the farmhouse. Instead, Dimitri drove them to Victor's downtown residence, a penthouse apartment Margot had only been to a handful of times. It was sleek and modern and cold, nothing like the warmth of the farmhouse, but it was also the most secure location Victor owned. Within an hour, the apartment was full of people, men in dark suits with earpieces and grim expressions, women with laptops, typing furiously, tracking Graham Sinclair's digital footprint across the internet. A steady stream of information flowing in, being analyzed, being acted upon. Margot sat on the leather sofa in the living room, feeling useless. She'd wanted to help. She'd demanded to help. But Victor had taken her hands, looked her in the eyes, and said, The best thing you can do right now is stay safe. Let me handle this. So she sat, and she waited. And she tried not to fall apart. It was nearly midnight when Victor came to her. He looked tired, worn. There were lines around his eyes she'd never noticed before. We found him, he said. Margot's heart lurched. Where? He's been staying at a motel outside the city, paying cash, using a fake name. Victor sat down beside her. He's been planning this for months, Margot. He's got files, documents, photographs. He's been building a case, not for the police, but for the press. He wants to go public with everything he knows about me, and he wants to do it in a way that makes you look like either a victim or an accomplice. I don't care what people think of me. You should. Your career, your reputation, everything you've built. I don't care. She grabbed his hands. Victor, I don't care. Let him talk. Let him tell the whole world. I'm not going to hide from him anymore. I'm not going to let him control my life. Victor looked at her for a long moment. You might lose everything. I already lost everything once, and I survived. I'll survive again. She squeezed his hands. But I won't survive losing you. So whatever you're planning to do, whatever you think you need to do to protect me, I want you to stop and listen to me first. He was quiet. Don't kill him. Victor's expression didn't change. I know that's what you're thinking. I know that's what you think needs to happen to make this stop. But I don't want his death on your conscience. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if the man I love is going to be taken away from me because of something he did for my sake. Margot, I mean it, Victor. I need you to hear me. I'm not asking you to let him go. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm asking you to find another way. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, There might be another option. What? Graham has been building a case against me, but I've been building a case against him too. Not just the financial crimes. Those are done. But the abuse, the threats, the harassment, everything he's done to you, documented and verified. Margot's breath caught. You've been documenting it? From the beginning, just in case. His jaw tightened. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this. But if Graham wants to go public, then we go public first. We tell your story, the real story. We show the world who he really is, before he has a chance to spin it. You mean, go to the press? Tell everyone what he did to me? Yes. Margot's stomach churned. The idea of her private pain, her shame, her fear, the darkest moments of her marriage, being splashed across headlines and talked about by strangers made her want to crawl out of her skin. But, if she did it, if she told the truth, then Graham wouldn't be able to twist it. He wouldn't be able to make her the villain. He wouldn't be able to win. If I do this, she said slowly, I want to do it on my terms, my words, my story. Not some tabloid reporter looking for clicks. I can arrange that, a long-form interview, someone reputable, someone who will let you speak. And Graham? Once your story is out there, his loses all its power. He becomes the abuser who got exposed, not the whistleblower who took down a corrupt businessman. And if he tries anything after that, anything at all, I'll have grounds to respond. Legally. Margot almost laughed. Legally? You? A faint smile crossed Victor's face. I do have lawyers. Very good ones. She shook her head, but she was smiling too. And then she took a breath. Okay. Okay? Let's do it. Let's tell the truth. Victor looked at her like she'd just handed him the world. You're sure? I'm sure. She touched his face. I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid. If Graham wants a war, then we'll give him one. But we'll fight it in the light, not the shadows. And we'll win. Victor turned his head and kissed her palm. Yes, he said. We will. The interview aired 2 weeks later. Margot sat in a quiet studio across from a journalist she'd chosen herself, a woman named Patricia Holloway, who had spent 20 years covering domestic violence and survivor stories. Patricia was kind but unflinching, and she asked the hard questions, and Margot answered every single one. She talked about the first time Graham hit her. She talked about the isolation, the fear, the shame. She talked about the moment she'd realized she had to get out, and the terror of not knowing how. She talked about Victor. She didn't reveal everything. She wasn't stupid, and neither was Patricia. But she talked about finding safety, finding support, finding someone who believed her when she said she was being hurt, and she talked about healing, about the long, slow process of rebuilding herself, about learning to trust again, about finding love in the place she'd least expected it. The interview was 30 minutes long. By the time it aired, Graham Sinclair had already been arrested. It turned out that Victor's lawyers, and his less official resources, had uncovered something Graham hadn't anticipated. Evidence of fraud. Real fraud. The kind that came with federal charges and prison time. Graham had been so focused on his vendetta against Victor that he'd gotten sloppy. He'd made mistakes, and now he was going to pay for them. Not with his life. With his freedom. Margot watched the news coverage from the farmhouse, Victor beside her, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Pity. Not forgiveness. Never forgiveness. But pity. For a man so broken, so consumed by his own rage and inadequacy, that he'd destroyed everything he'd ever had, and still couldn't see that the problem was him. "He'll be gone for a long time," Victor said quietly. "Good. You're okay?" She turned to look at him. "I'm better than okay." And she meant it. The wedding was small. Margot had thought she'd want something big. A declaration, a celebration, a chance to show the world that she'd survived and thrived, and found her happily ever after. But when it came down to it, she didn't need the world to see. She just needed Victor. So they got married at the farmhouse, in the garden behind the kitchen, with Helen and Dmitri as witnesses, and a justice of the peace who'd known Victor's mother. Margot wore a simple white dress. Victor wore a dark suit and a look on his face like he couldn't believe his luck. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises to be honest, to be present, to fight for each other and never against each other. And when Victor slid the ring onto her finger, the ring with his mother's sapphires, Margot felt something settle into place in her chest. Something that felt like home. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." He kissed her, and Helen cried, and Dmitri looked deeply uncomfortable, but also maybe a little misty-eyed, though he'd deny it forever. And Margot laughed. She laughed because she was happy, because she was free, because she'd walked through fire and come out the other side, and the man standing beside her had been there for every step. "So," Victor said, pulling back just enough to look at her. "What now?" Margot smiled. "Now? We live." And they did. They traveled, to places Victor had seen 100 times, and places neither of them had been. They came home to the farmhouse and the garden, and the quiet life they'd built together. Margot's studio thrived. Her art sold. She started teaching classes, working with other survivors, helping them find their voices through creativity. Victor stepped back from certain aspects of his business. Not all of them. He was still who he was, and Margot had made her peace with that. But the darkest parts, the most dangerous parts, he let go. Because he had something to live for now. Something more important than power. They talked about children sometimes. Not yet, they agreed. But maybe someday, when the time was right. And every night, no matter what, they came home to each other. 2 years after the wedding, Margot stood in her studio, putting the finishing touches on a new painting. It was different from her other work, softer, warmer. A landscape of the farmhouse in autumn, the leaves turning gold and red, smoke curling from the chimney. Home. Victor appeared in the doorway. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's for us, for over the fireplace." He crossed to her and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I have something to tell you," he said. "Good something or bad something?" "Good something." He paused. "I think." Margot turned in his arms, searching his face. "What is it?" "I got a call today, from someone I used to work with. He's retiring, getting out of the life completely, and he asked if I wanted to take over his operation." Margot's heart stuttered. "Victor? I said no. She stared at him. I said no, he repeated. Because I realized something. I've spent my whole life building power so that I could protect the people I love. But I don't need that kind of power anymore. I have you. I have this life. And that's enough. Margot's eyes were burning. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He cupped her face in his hands. You saved me, Margot. You probably don't know that. But you did. Before you, I was surviving. I was functioning. But I wasn't living. And now I am. Because of you. A tear slipped down her cheek. I didn't save you. You saved yourself. Maybe we saved each other. She laughed, watery and bright. Maybe we did. He kissed her forehead, and Margot leaned into him, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her chest. Outside, the sun was setting over the farmhouse, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside, everything was quiet. Everything was warm. Everything was exactly as it should be. And Margot Kessler, because that was her name now, the name she'd chosen, the name she'd earned, smiled. Because she'd learned something in the past 3 years. She'd learned that survival wasn't just about escaping the fire. It was about what you built from the ashes, and she'd built something beautiful.